guys, Miss Slack here. So, today I want to ask you a question. What makes it so animals can survive in so many different environments? How can they survive the heat of the day, the cool of the winter? How do they survive when there's little to no food to eat, when there's dust storms, when the water is freezing cold? How do all these animals make it in the wild? And why can't we do the same? Why do we need to have coats and jackets while they don't have to have any of that? So that's what we're going to talk about today. And the reason all these animals can live in these environments is because of something called adaptations. So an adaptation is anything that helps an animal survive. That can be the shape of its mouth, it can be how it lives, it can be what it does to help it survive. So one of the things that you can divide it up in, you can divide it into structural adaptations and behavioral adaptations. Structural is going to be things like how their eyes are shaped, how their ears are shaped, how their nose is shaped, how their beak or face is shaped, what kind of teeth do they have, what kind of arms or legs or fur or scales. All of that is adaptations that are structural. Behavioral adaptations are adaptations that allow them to have a certain behavior. And those can be learned or it can be instinct. So things like living in a herd or a flock, going into hiding, being able to go into hibernation, and being able to do things of that nature. So things like a herd of wildebeest. They are behaviorally adapted to want to be in a big herd. Now, that's all instinct, meaning that no one had to teach them to be in a herd. They just know they want to be. Something that could be taught, though, is things like orcas. Orcas hunt things like seals, and they actually have to be taught by their mother how to hunt those animals. They don't just instinctually know. But that's a behavioral adaptation. So we're going to take a closer look at all these different adaptations, and we're going to look at some skulls, because different bones and skulls can actually tell a lot about an animal, even without them being right there next to us. So let's get started. And talk about structural adaptations. So we're going to go ahead and look at some different skulls. These skulls were all either found by me or given to me. And these are all animals that it's okay to have skulls. Some animals it's not allowed, but these are all ones that you can have. So we're going to first talk about predator and prey. So predator, do you remember what it is? If you remember correctly, a predator is an animal that eats other animals. And typically a predator is going to be something called a carnivore. We're not going to talk about carnivores yet. We're going to talk about actually prey. And prey can be all sorts of animals. A prey animal is just an animal that gets eaten by another. And prey animals can be carnivores, they can be herbivores, and they can be omnivores. So we're just going to start with herbivores. What do you think the word herbivores mean? Right, if you guessed that herbivores means that they eat only plants, then you'd be correct. So we're going to start with our smallest herbivore, which is actually a small little rat. All right, so as you can see, this animal has very small teeth in the back. These are going to be used for grinding. And then they're going to have these long incisor teeth, which are meant for like chewing through different branches and other things similar to that. Now, knowing that, we can look, and that's an adaptation of a herbivore. Having those flat grinding teeth help them grind down plant material. So with those flat teeth, we also have eyes. So you can see these little orbits. They are the eye orbits, all right? These eye orbits show where the eyeballs were on a skull. So when we're looking at this, when you're looking at a prey animal, what side are they looking at, straight at you, or are they on the sides? Right, they are on the sides. Now, why would an animal that gets eaten by other animals have eye sockets on the side? Good, it's because if they have eye sockets on the side, it means that they can see predators a whole lot easier than if it was on the front. It gives them a wider range of vision. So just for that one skull, we saw that its adaptations, it had long incisor teeth, probably for chewing on sticks or cutting through stuff, with small grinding teeth. And those grinding teeth are for herbivores. Both of those are adaptations. It helps the animal survive. They also have eye sockets that are on the side of their head, not in the front. That is an adaptation of a prey animal. All right, so let's move on to our next prey animal. So our next prey animal is one that you probably recognize. It is a white-tailed deer. So the first thing you might notice about this white-tailed deer skull is that the adaptations that it has are these antlers, right? And these are antlers, not horns. Antlers are meant typically for mating or reproduction and will fall off when mating season is over. Horns stay on there for the entire year. So its first adaptation, it has these antlers. Now these antlers are an adaptation to help attract a mate. So they're going to use these antlers to impress the ladies, fight, and prove that they are a strong, capable male that will have good genes. All right? The second thing is just like all our prey animals, the eye sockets are large, right? And they're on the sides of the head. The reason they're on the side of the head is so that he can see predators coming before they get there. You will also notice, if we flip him over, he has nice grinding teeth. Now these grinding teeth are an adaptation for herbivores. This helps them grind down the plant material that they can eat. All right? So we got a mouse and a deer. So let's move on to our third one. So this one you might not instantly recognize. But when we're looking at it, what do you think it is? Good. If you guessed that it is a wild pig, you would be correct. Now wild pigs can eat other things, but they're mainly herbivores. So we will look right away. What's the first thing we notice is that its eyes are on what side of its head, the front or the sides? Good, the sides. So we know that it is a prey animal. And as a prey animal, we look and it has the grinding teeth. Wild boars are not native to Texas, but they are an invasive species. An invasive species is a species in which is in an area that it doesn't belong. So they're pretty much taking over. It's very typical to find them, especially around here, if you go to any of the nature centers. All right, and so the tusks on a wild boar are actually used, again, just like the deer, is used to impress a mate, but both males and females will have them. We're not really sure if they have any other use, though they will use them to injure predators if they do come, or people. So it could be a way of defense. It's kind of an argument of what they're actually meant for, but that is an adaptation. So all of that is an adaptation. Now one thing you might notice right away with this guy is he has a much longer face. And that longer face is actually an adaptation as well. So if you think about a pig, of course it's hard to think about it with all its skin and muscle and all that. They have a very, when we think of them, their face isn't that long, but they're actually pretty long. And that long face actually holds a bunch, I don't know if you can see it, if you look inside the nostrils, it has a bunch of combs, and that helps the nose be able to pick up scent better. So pigs are able to smell very well, and they are very sensitive to it. So that is also an adaptation that helps this wild boar survive. All right, so we're gonna take a look at our last herbivore. It's our biggest one. Now this is a cow skull. So this is a domestic animal that you guys are probably pretty familiar with. But as you can see, it has all the same adaptations as our wild counterparts. So if you look, we got big eyes on the side of its head. An adaptation of prey is have eyes on the side, all right? And it rhymes too, so that should help. And if you look, it has these big grinding teeth. Now, even elephants, if we were to get a look at an elephant tooth, look, they're just bigger, but they're meant for grinding down the plants, kind of like a mortar and pestle, if you've ever used or seen one of those. All right, so those are some adaptations of prey animals. Now, if there's prey animals, there are predators, right? So let's look at some adaptations of predators. All right, so let's start on the predators. So we're gonna start with one that's pretty common in Texas, and you might recognize it. So the first things we're gonna notice is that it has eyes that are kind of on the side, but look where they're pointing. When I point the skull towards you, which way are they looking? Right, they're looking right at you. So predators typically have eyes that are forward facing, just like us. We're technically, as far as looking at our eyes and adaptation of where they're on our face, we are predators because it's forward facing eyes, all right? You'll also notice, of course, all predators have these long fangs. So not all of them have it in the same spot. This is actually a coyote skull. So he has canines that are extended. But almost all predators are gonna have a carnassial. Now a carnassial is pretty much just mammals that have that. And that carnassial is meant for shredding. So that's a tooth that literally its whole job is to shred meat off the bone. All right? You'll also notice he has a long nose, which what we found from the wild boar is that the long nose is to use for scent. So the adaptations that we can see on this guy is that he has forward-facing eyes, he has a carnassial or sharp teeth, whichever, those are both adaptations, and long fangs, right? So our next carnivore is actually a feline. So this skull is a bobcat. Now, as you can see, it has forward-facing eyes. So we know it's a predator. That's its first adaptation, forward-facing eyes. You also notice, look at how big these eyes are. Why would an animal need big eyes? Correct. So big eyes are typically an adaptation of animals that can see in the dark. And that's because they have to have larger eyes that are able to collect more light in low light environments. But we'll also look, it has its fangs just like our canines, just like our coyote, right? So that's an adaptation of a predator. And as you can see, it has the nice carnassials. So those carnassials meant for shredding meat. So our adaptations on this bobcat is it has large orbits meant for for seeing in the dark. We have canines, which is an adaptation for eating meat, and carnassials, which is another adaptation to help them eat meat. All right, our last one is actually not a mammal at all. It is actually a reptile, and this is a croc skull. So this is actually a Nile crocodile from Africa, and you will notice his eyes are forward facing. But what's another adaptation on this guy is that we can see that his eyes are on top of his head. Now, why would a crocodile need the adaptation of having his eyes and nose on the top, not on the forward facing like the coyote? Right, because crocs sit in the water with only the top of their head showing, they need the adaptation of their nose being on top and their eyes above the water. All right, so the adaptation of having the eyes forward facing, just like a predator, right? We then don't have a carnassial, but he has all these teeth. And an adaptation that a croc has is that if he loses a tooth, he grows another. He is constantly shedding his teeth. Sharks will also do this. That just means when he's catching his prey, he doesn't have to worry about breaking a tooth off. If a tooth breaks off, no problem. He can just make another later. All right? So another adaptation you might notice is you can't feel it, but this bone is very, very dense. And the reason it's so dense, I don't know if any of you guys have ever watched crocodiles eating wildebeest out of the water, but it is gnarly and they get kicked and throttled and moved around, so they have to have very strong skeletons. So having a strong skeleton for this animal is also an adaptation. All right, so those are the predators. But like I said, we have our herbivores, we also have carnivores. These guys were all carnivores. But we also have something called omnivores. So omnivores means they can eat both meat and veggies. And typically those animals are prey and a predator. So let's look at some of those adaptations of those skulls. So let's look at our omnivores. So omnivores, like I said, can be a predator and a prey. So the first one we're gonna look at, you might recognize, you might not. So this animal actually is the only marsupial that lives in the United States. And a marsupial is a mammal that has a pouch. So kind of like a kangaroo or a koala. Any guesses? Correct, this is an opossum. All right, this is a North American opossum. And the first thing we'll notice is which way are the eyes pointed. So the eyes are pointed in the front, but they're not very large. Now opossums, their eyesight is not very good, but they rely on something else, right? So we look and we see this long nose, right? So that adaptation is they have a good sense of smell, all right? If we look at the teeth, now this guy is actually glued together, but if we look, you can see he has nice canines. Those canines and sharp teeth are actually going to be used for eating things like, they'll eat little mice, they'll eat snakes, worms, bugs. They actually do eat ticks, which nobody really likes ticks. They will also eat things you can see in the back. They have grinding teeth, so they'll eat things like berries and different kinds of roots and shoots and things like that. And of course, they'll eat anything that we've left out for them to eat. They're willing to eat anything they can find, right? So we have the eyes that are facing to the front. So he has predator eyes. But the way that we know that he's probably also a prey animal, having the long nose helps him with scent. So for him being a prey animal, it's kind of hard to find stuff that make us think prey. The reason we know he's a prey animal is just based on basic ecology. So if you know the animals you're talking about, you can know some more. But based on the skull, we would think he was just a predator, okay? Have a skull of a raccoon. So raccoons are very common. This skull's still kind of dirty and broken. So what we're gonna do is we look at it, right? So when we first look at it, the eyes are facing which way? That's right, they're facing kind of forward, right? But he has much bigger eyes than our possum, and his nose is not nearly as long, right? Doesn't mean he can't smell, it just means the smell's not as good as the possum. So we look, he has these nice large canines meant for eating things like fish and pieces of meat, small animals, things like that. Anything that's kind of smaller than him. I'm sure he'd take some frogs, some lizards, everything like that. Well, in the back, if we look, he has these grinding teeth. Those grinding teeth are used to eat things like berries and nuts and cotton candy, if anybody's seen that video. So they'll eat anything. Raccoons are not picky. Anything they can find, they will eat. But in the wild and in natural habitats, without humans, they should be eating things like nuts and berries and roots, along with other small animals. So again, this is another omnivore. And we saw these forward-facing eyes just like a predator, right? All right, so those were our omnivores. So let's look at some just basic structural adaptations that aren't necessarily skulls, but are just different pieces of animals. So the first structure I want to talk about is if you've ever been to a beach or any kind of ocean or river, you might have found something similar to these, right? These are shells. Now, a lot of people don't know that shells are actually a part of an animal. So we got right here this beautiful Florida conch, right? And inside, you see this opening, right? A lot of people think that it's a hermit crab. It is not. This is actually made from a snail. And that snail grows a shell its entire life. So the adaptation of the snail is to have a nice hard shell that it grows. This shell is actually made of the calcium that it pulls from the water. And it pulls that calcium to help build its shell as it gets older. So it actually starts as the teeniest tiny part and grows around as it gets older. So that snail, its adaptation is to be able to build this seashell. So this seashell, as you can see, is on it are actually adaptations as well. These spikes help prevent predators from getting in because if the animal, like an octopus, has to go around like this, it's very difficult. Now, does that mean it protects it indefinitely? No. A lot of animals do eat snails, but this helps protect it and make it more difficult for the animal to get eaten. We also have this pin ear. This is also similar to the snail, but it's actually from something called a bivalve. And a bivalve is things like clams. So it means they have bi, which means two shells, all right? So that was a monovalve as the snail. or Florida conch. Well, this is a bivalve. And it's the same thing. So he builds the shell out of the ocean, and his soft body lives inside. And he'll live in there his entire life, and this will grow with him his entire life until eventually the animal is either predated on, or in this case, just passed away. Usually the shells, if a predator has eaten them and it's a bivalve, usually the shells are separated. Not all the time, but usually. So I'm assuming that one passed away from old age or cold. And that's the same for this cockleshell. This cockleshell also is a bivalve. Of course, I only found one. So the cockleshell, again, will encrust itself just like this to protect itself from predators. And it will just open the tiniest bit to get food and to see. And inside would be a nice soft body. So the adaptation of these snails and clams is to have a hard shell. So an adaptation is to have a hard shell. Now, both those animals had the similar adaptation, but it came out different, right? So one only has to grow one shell, when one grows two. All right, so let's look at some defense mechanisms, which are versions of adaptations. So everyone's pretty familiar with turtles and tortoises, right? And everybody kind of knows that a turtle and tortoise comes with a shell, right? But not everybody knows that this shell is actually a part of their body. It's an adaptation to help protect them from predators. It's actually bone. So if we look at this closely, you can see all the little cracks and crevices of the bone. And have a few shells. So this is from a red-eared slider, and then we got a musk turtle. So you can see they're different in size and shape. That's just different adaptations. But on the inside, this is a snapping turtle shell, by the way. On the inside, you will see on this one, this is broken too, but it's actually their shell is a part of their spine. And this part right here is actually part of their ribs. So their spine and ribs are what make up their shell. They're just spread out and widened. So that adaptation of having those their bones flattened and spread to actually make a shell is an adaptation to protect them, right? So that makes it so they can live in environments with gators and things of that similar nature, and helps protect them from danger. So the last adaptation that I'm going to show you that is a bone is actually comes from a large herbivore that lives up in northern North America. All right, and this, see, I'm gonna have to back up for you guys to see it, is a moose antler. So moose are a large herbivore, and these antlers grow only on the males. Now, why would a male need to grow such a big antler? Right, if you remember from our white-tailed deer, it's to impress the ladies. So part of adaptations is some of the adaptations to help them survive actually is to also help them breed. And one of the ways the males have to determine who gets to breed is by either fighting or displaying, or both. So the display part is how big is it? How flat is it? How much stronger is this bull than me? Because if the bull can carry around this giant antler, then he's got to be a strong male, right? Just like somebody at the gym. If they're lifting heavier weights and walking around all buffed out, they're showing off, right? Well, if you have an antler that's smaller or skinnier, and you see this big buff antler, you're gonna get out of his way. Just like at the gym, if the big buff guy wants to use the weight machine, and you're a tiny little person like me, then you're probably gonna get out of their way, right? So it's the same thing. So having bigger antlers is an adaptation for males to actually show their worth to females and have the ability to have babies. All right, so that's an adaptation. But now we've looked at all these different skulls and different structures, I want to go look at some live examples. All right, so let's go look at a few of my live animals. So our next guest is a beautiful African gray parrot named Aubrey. So let's look at some of his adaptations. So what's the first thing you notice? Is his eyes pointing forward, or are they on the side? Oh, scratches. Right, they're on the side. So Aubrey in the wild would be a prey animal. He would not eat any kind of meat. What's another adaptation you see? Show him. So just like Aubrey was just showing you are his wings. So birds have the adaptation of wings so they can fly. Along with flighted wings and the feathers, right? Which is also an adaptation. They also have hollow bones. So if we were to look at Aubrey's bones, they're actually got little tiny holes in them, which allows for him to fly. Right? Good bird. We also have these feet. Now, as you can see, he's trying to scratch himself with his feet, but his feet can be used for gripping, right? He also uses it to grab hold of things and experiment with things. African greys are a very smart bird, so another adaptation are going to be these feet. And as you can see, there are no feathers on his feet. They're just plain skin. And the reason there's no feathers on his feet is to help with heat. So they are from Africa, and having bare feet helps change that. Another adaptation that he just showed you is that he is able to vocalize. So being able to communicate is a very important adaptation to have if you live in any kind of group. So this kind of bird will actually live with a partner for life. So he'll have one partner who he lives with, and then he will also live in a flock, which being able to talk to them and communicate is very important. So with that adaptation of being able to vocalize, you'll also notice his eyes. If you'll let me, can you show them your eyes? So as you can see, they are very wide. And if you look close enough, if he lets me, you will see that when he can actually dilate his pupil in order to focus better, giving him super good eyesight. So having good eyesight is a good adaptation to have. It helps him locate food, and it also helps him watch out for predators. All right, what's one last adaptation on this bird that you think might be? That is correct, this beak. Now I'm gonna go grab him a treat so you can see what the beak is adapted for. Who's a good bird? Aubrey's beak is adapted for breaking open different kinds of nuts and berries. So he's gonna demonstrate, hopefully if he's hungry, how he does it. So his tongue is also very flat. So that flat tongue is actually able to work kind of like a thumb. So he's able to use that to push and pull how he needs it to be. While the sharp beak is able to pierce the shell easily. Is that good? Bird. So as you can see, he's using his hand to grip, just like we talked about earlier. Oh, you dropped it. So let's list those adaptations again. So Aubrey has the adaptation of flight, which includes having the wings and the feathers to do so, along with hollow bones. He also has the adaptation of eyes on the side to help him see for predators. He also has the ability to dilate and fluctuate his pupil at will, so he is able to use it kind of like focusing on a camera. So has the adaptation of very good eyesight. He also has the adaptation of being able to break open nuts and berries with his strong beak, the adaptation of having feet that are able to grip onto different items and manipulate. He has a tongue that works like a thumb, and he has the ability to vocalize. So all in all, every animal has so many adaptations that if we just wanted to cover one animal and get every single adaptation, there would actually be so many that it would actually probably take 10 to 15 minutes of straight lists. So we're not going to do that, but just realize that animals have tons of different adaptations to specialize them for how they live. So let's look at another animal. Alright, so you guys met these guys on one of the other videos. These are bearded dragons. They are native to Australia. So some of their adaptations they have is they have these scales. So these scales on her side help protect her from predators, right? We also have, again, eyes are on the side of their face. And that's true because they are actually a prey animal. They are a predator as well, but they're also a prey. The reason she has red, just kind of off topic, is she had strawberries today, so she's got a little stained. Another adaptation these guys have is, show that me, can I see? They have little hands with these claws. Now these claws are not meant for using as defense. They are actually used to help them climb, which when they're younger they use a lot more often than when they're adults. Now when they're scared, these guys don't really display it all, but in the wild, this beard can actually flex all the way out, and then it would turn all black, and then it would flatten their back and try and make themselves look big and scary. Now in this situation, it's hard to see that because they really won't show that. But that's how these animals would survive in the wild. So some adaptations also is they would live in a desert environment. That means there's a heat, right? And one of the biggest things that affect your survival is water. So these guys are actually able to store their water, and they can get water out from bugs they eat. Also, having scales on their body also helps prevent the animals from losing water. So they don't sweat like us. And that helps prevent them from water loss, which helps them be adapted for the environment they live in. So that is some basic adaptations of the bearded dragon. Say hi. Alright, so let's look at one of our last examples. So this is a western hognose. It's a species of snake. So again, an adaptation of a snake is going to be having these scales. And different snakes have different kinds of scales. So for this guy, he actually digs and will live under rocks and ledges and crevices. So his scales are pretty smooth, but they're also keeled, which means that they raised slightly. And that just helps him go through the dirt easier without cutting himself. Now, something about a hognose that's very interesting in adaptation is you'll look at their face. And you see this tiny little nose. So they actually have an upturned nose, a specialized scale, and that's an adaptation to help him dig. So helping him dig will help him get away from predators, get out of the heat, and be able to better survive in his environment. And his environment is in the western United States. Let me readjust a little bit. So we also have what he's doing right now. An adaptation for him is also his tongue. And his tongue is actually not for tasting. What he is doing is they have a special organ in the back of their throat, and it's called a Jacob's organ. What his tongue does is it flicks around getting any scent particles, puts it back in his mouth, and sticks that fork into his Jacob's organ, so he's better able to locate and understand what his environment is showing. So he is in the wild. He doesn't do it very often, but animals, when he's scared, and he has the behavioral adaptation of actually being able to play dead. So what they'll do is they'll hiss and freak out, they'll open their mouth, hang their tongue out, and then flip over on their back. Now these animals will sit there, and even if you flip them back over, they will flip themselves to be like, no, I'm dead. So these animals are very well adapted. They are a prey animal. A lot of different species eat these guys, but they're also a strict predator. So they will only eat, in the wild they would actually eat frogs. So they would only eat meat. And those are some of the basic adaptations of this little hognose. So let's review. His adaptations are his scales, his ability to use his tongue to sense his environment, his little upturned nose, and his keeled scales. All right, and eyes on the side. So let's go review. So in conclusion, an adaptation is anything that helps an animal survive. That can be having big ears to help get rid of heat. It could be having heat pits to be able to sense other animals around you. It could be having eyes on the side for prey and eyes forward for predators. It can be having fur or feathers. It can be having a long nose. It can be having tusks. There's so many options for adaptations. Now, the important thing to know is pretty much every part of an animal is going to be an adaptation. Knowing what those adaptations are used for is very important. So trying to understand the animal's physiology. So if you're looking at your dog or a cat or any pet at home, look at where it's from. Why does it have what it has? Why does it act the way it is? Those are adaptations, and the reason they have them is there is a reason why these animals have those adaptations. And if you can relate to those animals, you'll be better able to understand the world around you. So that's it for today, guys. Make sure you do your assignments, and I will see you next time.